Scott Allan, welcome to the show. How are you today?
Oh, well, I'm doing great, and it's great to be here. Thanks for having me on the show.
It is a pleasure to have you. Thank you for being here. And I'm excited to dive into our conversation. I feel like we're going to have a lot to talk about, a lot of things to discuss, and it's a subject area that I'm particularly interested in as well. So I'm sure that there's going to be plenty of different insights, and a lot of these questions may be a little bit selfish as well, but I trust that they're going to help the audience too. But before we do dive into that, can you give us a little context about who you are and what it is that you do?
Sure thing. So, my name is Scott Allan. I'm an author, entrepreneur, content creator, and I'm also a coach. Not a life coach, but I coach people through, any situations that they need help with. I teach people how to get unstuck from life and to move forward so that they can become the greatest versions of themselves and ultimately live a great life. And I've been living in Japan for about 25, 26 years, and originally from Canada. But yeah, I came here like a long time ago. I worked in corporate for a long time, and I started building my publishing business maybe over a decade ago. And since then, put out about 35 to maybe 40 books in various languages. So I've been very busy building things.
Yeah, it does sound like it. And I'm curious about your location choice. What keeps you in Japan at this moment in time?
Yeah, well, when I first came here, I just fell in love with the place right away. Got right into the culture, started learning the language, and I love the work. I was an electrical engineer back in Canada. I did that for a good many years, but I realized looking into the future, which is something I'm rather good at doing, I didn't want to pursue that path. I'd gone as far as I could with it, and so I started to look at other options. And after doing some deep reflection, I decided to move to the other side of the world and start something new there. So when I made that decision, and there's kind of a longer story into how that decision came about, but after making that decision to do that, things started to unfold. I ended up finding a job here while I was still in Canada, and the company brought me over with a few other people, I think, and set us up in a homestay, gave us a car. We had lots of work, and I just had no reason to really move back. I thought it was great, and I still do. I've been here for, yeah, quite a long time. And yes, I've family now, have my business here, and I still enjoy the day-to-day lifestyle, as well as traveling. Love traveling, and that's the great thing about living here is that if you're near a station, you've got those, the bullet trains. You get on one of those. They go, a few hundred miles per hour, I think. So they're pretty fast. And I'm just outside of Osaka, so I can be in Tokyo within a couple of hours, and I can be in Kyoto within 40 minutes. So that's the one thing I love about it is just the mobility. And every time you go to a different place here, it's like going, jumping into a different world. So
That's pretty incredible. Yeah, I've never been to Japan myself, but you've certainly piqued my curiosity. I mean, my curiosity was already piqued, but you've done it even more now off the back of that as well. So big transition from country, and also a big transition career-wise as well. Obviously, you weren't doing what you're doing today 20 years ago. So what did that transition look like exactly?
yeah, so that transition was actually pretty easy because I had things set up so I'll just give you a little bit of background there. I was going through a moment in my life where I needed to make some choices into how I was living. I was just always partying all the time, and I didn't have a lot of direction. And I thought, there's got to be something more to life than this. And so when I started to look more into that, I got myself cleaned up, and then I started getting clarity on what I really wanted to do. And I remember taking time out to write down my goals again and again and again. I did this, it was like a daily practice, and it still is. And when I had clarity on that, there were a few things that came to light. One was I wanted to be an author, and that was something I'd wanted since I was way back in elementary school, so that hadn't changed. Second was I wanted to travel around the world, and the third was I just wanted to become a better human being. So I realized the third one was probably going to be a lifetime journey. The first one I wasn't quite ready for, but the second one, traveling, I was like, I could probably do that in about a year. So I just made a decision right then and there. I was going to leave my job within a year from that day, and I actually did. It was a good career, I think. I built it to what it was, but I don't know, crawling around in the dirt with high voltage wires and hooking things up after a while, almost frying myself a couple of times. I was like, there's got to be something better than this. So leaving that wasn't, it wasn't that difficult. But moving here, though, it's just a completely different. Like, first of all, the working culture was very different, and secondly, I don't have a background in education or anything like that. And the good thing is that when I came here, The company gave us training and how to, we were teaching English or business English, and sometimes I would be in a junior high school, in a high school, and other times I would be sent to companies, to, corporations, to train their executives on how to go overseas to conduct themselves culturally and fit in, so to speak, right? So that's the part of the job I really like, though. I love the business side of things because I learned a lot from talking to people about it, right? So I really got into that. Yeah, the transition though was pretty like some people did not fit in culturally when they came here. They just couldn't handle it, or they just didn't. There's a lot of things that they didn't like about it, and sure, there's always that no matter where you go. But I always just focused on the good things about it, and I didn't let the other things bother me as much. And I just kept pushing forward. And when my year was up and I needed to get a new visa, for example, I would end up getting another job, and then that year was up and ended up getting another job because sometimes these companies would hire you just for 1 year, so you had to transition and get a working visa. So, but that always just like that's the things like these things were always they always lined up once I made that decision. Like I really want this thing really badly, and what's it going to take to stay here, right? So, and I apply that to everything in my life actually. Like it was the same with writing books and publishing as well. When I realized that's the path I wanted to take, I just went all in on it and just gave it everything I had. I mean, I still do, but back when I was just starting out, there are no guarantees when you start something that something's going to work, right? So I think that's what holds a lot of people back. But and the fear is there. I think you have to do it scared. You have to feel the fear and do it anyway. And I've just always taken that approach to things. Sure, there's always risk. There's always you might not get the outcome that you wanted, but if you don't take action, the only outcome is that you're not going to get what you want anyway. So
Exactly. From that perspective, you really have nothing to lose. And you mentioned, obviously, you were ready for step two, which was the traveling, but you weren't quite ready for step one. At which moment did you know it was the path to then take? You obviously knew it was the path to take, but at which moment did you say, okay, now is the time to get started on this and travel down that path?
yeah, that's the thing is like it was almost like a feeling that I had. Like it was an emotion that was just so strong. It was like this unbreakable, I don't know how to define it, but like a force inside of me that says, this is definitely what we're doing. Right. So when I made the decision that I wanted to travel to the other side of the world, my decision actually at the time was I'm going to travel to Thailand and Vietnam, and I actually had these countries laid out, and I was going to become a backpacker. So I was going to go from having a career as an engineer to suddenly becoming a backpacker at maybe I think I was 28 years old at the time. The thing is like I told my friends about this, and they're like, well, that sounds kind of, and I wasn't married at the time or anything like that. So I mean, I didn't have anything holding me back, but my friends were like, well, you sure you want to do this? I mean, you never know what could happen. It's like you've got your family here and friends and your job. And I'm like, yeah, but I'm going to go do this thing because, there's something was just pulling me towards doing it. So I mean, I couldn't. It's like jumping on a train. You can't stop that train because this just keeps moving. And that's just what I felt like I was on this path where, it was leading me towards that. So my plan was to go to Thailand and then just see what happens after getting there. But thing is, after making the decision that I was going to go traveling, several months later, I ended up, one day my roommate brought home in the newspaper. I just opened it up to a random page, and I never read the newspaper either. So it was just there. Something said, open that paper, and I did. And right there on that page was this big advertisement that said, teach English in Japan, apply today. And I was like, that sounds like a great idea. I'm going that way anyway. Why not? So I remember like just spending like the day coming up with this great resume. I tailored this resume for that job, right? So I didn't just send them the resume that I currently had. I know I had to sell it. So I came up with a really good, a letter and the resume, and I sent that off. And 2 weeks later, they contacted me and they said, yeah, they wanted to meet me. So there I was in downtown Vancouver having dinner in this really nice hotel with this Japanese businessman who owned these business schools in Japan, and they were looking to bring people over. And so they interviewed like 100 people, I think. They're only selecting 3. And after the interview, they called me up. Maybe it was a couple days later, and they said, you actually didn't get the job because you were number 4. We're really sorry, da da da. And I was like, I wasn't disappointed because I knew I was still going and I was gonna go and do my plan anyway. But I think a day after that, they called it. The next day they called back and said, the third guy dropped out, so you are in. So again, lottery tickets, like I call these lottery tickets, and we think of the lottery in terms of like winning money, but actually there's a lot of lottery tickets in people's lives. And I think that's just one thing that, is good to recognize. And that was like, for me, getting that ticket to come here was a big lottery ticket because it changed everything. And once I had that set, I mean, there was just like, now I had a plan, now I wasn't just going to get off a plane and, you know, become a backpacker traveling around. Nothing wrong with that. But obviously, like for the long term, that probably wouldn't have been a plan. But now I had a place to go, a job to work, to go into, and everything just worked out great when I got here. Not everybody has that story, I know, but for me, it was just like something just brought me here, and then something kept me here. And when I say that something, I mean you can define that as whether there was a universal power working in my favor. I just always felt like there was something behind the scenes that was pulling a lot of the strings, because sometimes I felt like all I had to do was make the decision and jump into the river, and it would just carry me in that direction. Now, of course, there were other decisions to make, but whenever I was clear on what I wanted, then something would show up to make it happen. I don't know if other people can relate to that or if that's happened to other people. I'm sure it has, but that was always my experience. And don't get me wrong, I mean, there were like a lot of hard times along the way, but that's the good stuff as well. So
Yeah, that's the thing. If you never get started on that path, you never have the opportunity to discover those opportunities that will come your way. So the first step is you being brave enough to obviously make that choice and go in that direction. And then it's just about being aware enough to take those opportunities when they come. And sometimes you'll come up with a big lottery win. Other times it will be just gentle nudges in the right direction, which seem meaningless at the time, but actually end up pushing you downstream of the direction that you wanted to go in. And then when you reflect back on that, hindsight is 2020. You're like, well, that needed to happen for that to happen, to that to happen. I feel very similar in that sense as well. Like I look at the path that I've traveled, and at that time, it didn't make as much sense. I kind of had an idea of where I wanted to go, but not a crystal clear, okay, this is where I want to be in 5 or 10 years. But I noticed that once you start treading that path, and as long as you're aware and you're open to what could come, it's amazing, what can come, whether you call it universe, whether you call it God, it seems to be almost trying to facilitate that, trying to help you on that ride that you're on, essentially. So it's really quite interesting. It's great that you gave us that context as well, because obviously what you're speaking about recently in one of your books specifically is the concept of relaunching your life, and that looks like very much what you did. And I'm not sure if that was the plan at the time, to kind of have a complete turnaround in location and job and all of those other things, but obviously that's something you talk about today. Is part of the work that you do today in terms of writing that book and talking about relaunching your life, does that come off the back of your story as well, or is it just something that you see people in great need of, that you felt the desire to write the book, or is it a combination of both of those two things?
yeah, that's a great question. So that book came about, I think I published that maybe going on 7 or 8 years ago. And that was actually, if I were to choose one book out of the lot, that's actually the one book that really stands out for me, because I remember when I was writing it, I was relating to a lot of the story, like the stories I was telling. And I didn't put enough of my story into that book. And I'm actually coming out with a second edition to that, where I'm going to put more into it, because I think at the time I kind of was holding back and I left out some of the story, right? But everything I'm telling you here is really related to relaunching your life is just about that, because I think people get to a certain point in their life where, and we all do this, where you start to just work in the job you're at, and you start to live the life you're in because that's the expectation. Maybe you've been working in your job for a year, 5 years, or 10 years, or maybe even longer, and just convinced yourself that's the only thing you can do. So we just stay on that course. But I wanted to prove to myself that, okay, I don't actually want to be working in this job in the long term, and life's not about your work anyway. But what if I could decide that I'm going to do something completely different, where there's no telling what's going to happen, there are no guarantees, and like what really thrills me about that is just living on the edge of uncertainty, right? Where I think a lot of us, we try to stay away from that ledge because we might fall off, we might fail. But for me, I feel like I'd always been walking on that edge anyway. So like, why not try this thing and just see what happens? And it could have not worked out as well as I was expecting. But then again, if I hadn't taken that leap, maybe I'd still be working in that old job with the, and it wasn't just the job, it was also like the lifestyle. I just wanted to live a life that was exciting and adventurous. And that's where the traveling came in, because once I moved to Japan, I got settled. And then when I had a vacation, I would start to, then I would go travel to Thailand or Vietnam. And these were vacations, but still, like, I remember actually my first time going to Thailand, and I was walking through Bangkok, and I came across this beautiful golden temple. I think it's called the Golden Pavilion, but there was a lot of people have seen this, probably this picture of the lying down Buddha, the sleeping Buddha. And I remember standing in front of this, and it suddenly occurred to me when I was standing in front of this long Buddha. It was like 18 meters long or something like that, and it occurred to me that this Buddha, the picture of this Buddha, was on my. So back in Canada, I created a vision board of everything all the places I wanted to go, and that picture was on my vision board. So I forgot to mention that point, by the way. When I put together my goals and everything like that, I created this big vision board in my apartment, and it was like I had like 3 out of my 4 walls were covered with like positivity quotes, pictures of the places I wanted to go. I think I went to the library, took out these books, photocopied them. This was kind of pre-internet too, so we did things the long way. And yeah, I just like made this vision, and basically what I was creating, and I didn't realize it at the time, but I was creating the destiny that I wanted to live and the life that I wanted to live. So when I was in Bangkok looking at this Buddha, I was like, that's the one, that's the picture that was on my wall, so that was when it occurred to me, like, wow, maybe, I manifested this. And then there was more, like, whenever I went to other countries, I would see these pictures of these places that I always wanted to visit. So in Japan as well. So that's when I realized, like, I'm on the right track. Like, although, there were many times when you have that self-doubt and that uncertainty. It's like, am I doing the right thing? Am I on the right track? Have I made the right choice? And all I can say is that I just kept moving forward, even when I felt like I wasn't doing the right thing. And sometimes that's just the way self-doubt is. It really plays on your mind. But you keep pushing forward, you keep believing, and eventually, like I believe anyway, that you're going to arrive at your destination, where you're actually going to say, okay, I'm glad I got through that. I'm glad I believed hard enough to actually make it happen. And for me, like, that's, again, it was just like this inner feeling, this really deep feeling, like, this is the way, this is the road less traveled. The title of one of my favorite books, by the way, and also one of my favorite poems, is like, the road less traveled is the road that I want to be on.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And how did you silence that inner voice and those doubts that kept coming through that visit all of us, right? Because the reality is that the more responsibilities we gain, maybe the more successful we become, or even just the longer we stay in something, like you said, with the career that you've been in for 5 or 10 years, it almost seems like the stakes get higher and higher, and taking the risk seems harder and harder. So this might be something where, an 18-year-old listens and has nothing to lose, and they take hold of whatever advice and they run with it, because realistically, whatever happens will happen. In 3 years, they're still going to be 21 years of age. When it comes to someone who's 38 or 48 or 58, and they're hearing this and they're like, well, I've got so much to lose and I've potentially got everything to gain, but the comfort of staying where I am seems a lot more certain and a lot more guaranteed. And is it really that bad? And, all those questions start to come in, right? So how do you gain the courage to make that step, irrespective of all the potential losses you could face off the back of making the wrong decision, so to speak?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And that's a big part of the struggle. So I'll tell you a quick story. So I left my corporate job here. I had a really good job in school here, and I was running a business school and everything, and did that for a long time. And I had started my publishing business way back, probably 2012, 2013, when Amazon first kicked off self-publishing. I'd already been looking for a publisher, and when they kicked this off, I was like, okay, I'd spent like 3 or 4 years writing these books, and had no idea how I was going to publish them, but my goal was just to publish the book. So I started building that business back then, and I was still working in my full-time job, very secure. By this time, by the way, I had the family, I had the mortgage, I had the car, and I had the pets and the whole thing, right? So I get that. Like, I'd always dreamed of, like, yeah, doing writing as a full-time career. But to be honest, I always referred to it as a hobby, because I never really believed that I could make money from it or make a career from it. Like, I was just like, as long as I could just publish one book, and then I did publish that book, and then I didn't tell anybody about it. I just put it out there, and then I did another one and another one, and it was still my hobby because it was something I enjoyed doing while I was working in my real job, right? And the thing is like the more I worked at it though, the more, I don't know if passion is the right word to use. It's more like it became more like an obsession, where it's like I started to really get into it because I started getting emails from people who were reading the books. And I remember when I put out Relaunch Your Life, maybe back in 2016 or 2017, that was actually the book that really took off. And when it did, it started to bring in some money, which I wasn't expecting. Up until then, I was getting a few dollars from Amazon and some other online publishers here and there. So, yeah, sure, I had some pocket money, but don't get me wrong, I wasn't thinking about leaving my job, right? But when things started to really, scale up for me, I was like, okay, well, maybe this is possible, and like I started to change my mind towards that. And what happened then is like I started to change my mind, but I actually started to develop a new vision for a different life that was possible. And again, this is going back to before I moved to Japan. I spent, a good a good year visualizing what that future would look like if I were to go traveling and do all of these things. Now, there's a flip side to this, and this is where like getting back to your point, like how do you deal with the self-doubt and the voices when they tell you, oh, it's not possible, you shouldn't do this, you're in a secure spot. Well, after working in that job for a long time, I realized like I didn't want to do that forever either, right? Even though it had been pretty good salary, and I was, taking care of my family. When I started making money from the books, and that started taking off, and then I started to get like book contracts with international publishers, and things just started moving forward, like unpredictable success, I guess, is what I look back now. Is like I didn't expect any of it. It just started happening because I realized I was sticking with it, and I was still creating content, doing the research, and teaching people, the frameworks in the book. So what happened is I had to create an anti-vision of what would happen if I didn't end up living the dream that I really wanted, which was actually to become so when I say like a full-time author, to me, well, that I don't sit at the computer writing for 8 hours a day. To me, it's like making more money than you're making your regular job, so you can spend time doing the things you want to do. To me, that's what it's about. And when I created that vision, I was like, that's interesting. Like I and the anti-vision, by the way, is the opposite of that. Is like I visualize myself sitting in, kind of like doing the same job in 10 or 20 years. And to me, that was almost like the anti-vision is like the nightmare of what that would become if I were to just to not take another chance, not throw my hat in the ring, and I could predict that. Like that's predictable, right? And again, everything that I was always about is moving away from my predictable lifestyle anyway. Like again, it comes back to that uncertainty. So I think back in 2019, I decided to leave that job. I just realized, like at the time, by the way, and I was making some pretty good money with the publishing and doing coaching and things like that. And okay, so here's the thing, something in me just said, it's time. And when something told me it's time to move forward, the next day I was in the manager's office giving I was actually running the company, and there was a CEO, and I was in there, and I said, I'm leaving in 3 months. And he's like, are you sure? You've been here for a long time, and it's kind of a secure job, and we're not going anywhere. I was like, yeah, I know, but I'm going somewhere. And that was it. And don't get me wrong, when I left, like there was like the next day I was like, did I do the right thing? Like, I wonder if is it too late to go back? And, so I had a lot of that, but I just decided to I made the decision. I'm going to push forward with it. And again, we're going to see what happens. And I know there is certainly like a level of risk there where you think, like because I was just kind of like, do I really know what I'm doing? Should I be doing this? Should I have consulted with more people? The more people I consulted with, the more different answers I got. And it didn't matter in the end who told me what, because that feeling inside me, that little voice or that big voice, was actually saying we did the right thing. I didn't totally believe it, but there we were, it was out there. So that was kind of a longer answer to your question, but there's a lot to, I think, process when you're going through that. And I'm not telling people to, just, you should just go with your gut feeling and do something and my decision wasn't really like, it wasn't just sudden like that. I mean, I've been planning it for a while, and I did have a business that I had been building. So it wasn't like an overnight success, right? And I still had a long ways to go, don't get me wrong, and I still do. But I've been doing that one thing for, I've been in that job for 20 years, and I realized that if I keep going this way, I'm not going to be able to create that great life that I wanted. And again, to me, everyone can define this, like you can frame this up however you want it, but to me, like living the great life was using the time you have left and doing what you want with that, whether that's spending more time with family, taking more trips, creating, and I'm not saying everybody has to become an entrepreneur and, make a bunch of money, but if that's something that you just feel driven to do, you do it. Because if you don't, think about what the anti-vision of that's going to be. If you don't do it, 20 years from now, are you going to look back and go, I wish I'd done that thing? And that thought right there was the turning point. That thought there was the reason that I made that decision, because I realized, okay, if I get like 10, 20 years from now, I look back and realize like I could have had that, but I decided not to because I was scared. And I just couldn't live with that. So
Yeah, I can
that was it.
imagine. And the anti vision part is such a powerful point that I want people to really take away, because of a lot of people will look at the opportunity and it's all nice to see the vision of what could be. But that's almost harder to envision than to imagine where you might be if you don't. I don't know why, but sometimes for us, it's easier to see the negative outcome. Maybe because there's more examples of that in our immediate surroundings, right? Maybe we've got a family member or a friend who looks pretty miserable. Maybe we're working with a client who's 60 years old and they never really went after their dream. And those people are in our immediate surroundings. There isn't too many who tackled their dream when they were 30 or 20 years old and they're now living the dream, and they're your nearest and dearest example. They're sometimes the people we see on social media or in the news or whatever that might be, but perhaps we can relate more to, well, what if we don't, because of we see that within our family, our friends, people around us. So I think that's a really powerful thing to do. I work within health and fitness, and so many of my clients always tell me like they're very motivated by where they could be, but they're also very motivated by not becoming what their parents were, for example, not running into those health challenges that they had. So that's where the anti-vision plays out, because if they've seen a really very real and visceral example of that. So I think that's really powerful, because it looks like vision in the positive format, in the sense of anticipating where you could be on the premise that you take the actions and everything goes well, but also flipping that around and saying, well, what will happen if I continue on that trajectory? Like it's a pull and a push. And I think that's always something that we need in life. We need that pull towards where we want to go, but we also need something behind us pushing us away from, what we could be if we don't take action. So I think that's super, super powerful. I really, really do. So thank you for sharing that. And something that you also mentioned, there's actually 3 kind of lines on the cover of that book. And the other one is like break the cycle of self-defeat. Where do you see that within your story? Because you mentioned obviously there was part of you who was, partying a little bit when you were younger, not really on that kind of path that you wanted to be. Is the self-defeat potentially staying in the job that you didn't want to? What aspect can you apply to your journey when you look at the self-defeat? Because I'm trying to think of how people can see that in their life. What is the self-defeat aspect that's coming up in our journeys, and how can we overcome that?
Yeah, great question. So the self-defeat really, it didn't have a lot to do with the work or anything like that. It was really my own, everything that was happening in my own mind.
Interesting. Yeah.
I've always had a strong pull towards self-sabotage. Although I wanted to be successful and do all these things, I had this other side of me where when things got really good, I would find a way to mess it up, or, do something to prevent the good outcome, because I felt inside that I wasn't good enough to have that thing, whether it was a relationship or it was more money or whatever it was. I would look for a way, without really being aware of it, that I would look for a way to um, mess it up. And just getting back to, let's just go back a few years. So I had a long history of alcoholism and drinking, and so back mostly when I was younger, and it started when I was back in my early 20s, and it just really got out of control. Had a lot of fun, but the problem with that kind of lifestyle is that eventually you get to the point where it's not fun anymore, and when you want to try and stop and you can't, then you got a bigger problem, right? So once I started to get help with that, and that took a while for, it took like a good year or two of just kind of like chasing the dragon with that. And, I had really good support, had sponsors. I had to reach out to people though and ask for help, which was one of the hardest things to do, because my history of self-sabotage came from a lot of that behavior, and also the self-defeat. I carried that for years still. Like I eventually like stopped drinking, and things got a lot better after that. Again, I think something just pulled me out of that fire and said, we've got to get this guy straight and get him onto a better path. And we did, or something did. I would say, like, even years later, there was always that. I don't know if it was a voice inside of me, but it's like that self-defeating voice where it's like, it challenges me when I want to try something. It's there to challenge me and say, like, you sure you want to do that? Because, you might fail at that. And it was always pulling me back. And then when things got really good, I would find some way to knock it down. Or if someone gave me a compliment about something, how well I did something, I would always accepting praise is not something that I'm to this day still not very good at. Someone gives me praise on something, I'm like, well, that could have happened to anybody. I just got lucky, and I realized, like, that's part of the self-defeating attitude is like, I'm not going to accept that maybe I'm just actually doing really well in life, and why is that a bad thing? So, but the self-defeat, like that, there's certain behaviors that people have. So we could take, just to give you one example, being a perfectionist can be considered a self-defeating behavior. Now, it can also be a strength. So I'm not saying that, like, it's totally like a self-defeating behavior. For a lot of people, it actually is a strength. I think it's a self-defeating behavior when it's holding you back from taking action. Right. For other people, it's a strength, and they can become more creative when they're perfectionists. But there's that. The other one is, yes, could be codependency, for example, is another self-defeating behavior. So again, like, I define it as anything that is getting in your way. It's an obstacle that's preventing you from becoming a greater human being, really. And we all have these. But by the way, we all have a self-defeating something. Like, everybody's got one thing at least. I probably had multiple dozens of them, and I still have them, right? But what's important is that you notice it when it's there, and you go, there it is again. There's that, voice telling me I'm not good enough, or there's that, I'm in a narcissistic relationship again. How did this happen? Like, there's a pattern to this. Like this pattern of self-sabotage and self-defeat where we keep falling into the same trap again and again and again. And until you actually start to do some, call it therapy, or, if you do some cognitive therapy around this, you can actually start to recognize the triggers and the patterns, and then you can change it. So part of what Relaunch Your Life is about, I said I was going to do a second edition of that. I'm actually going to write a new book around that. That was the plan, is because there was a lot more where I could have gone deeper into the self-defeat part, where it actually deserves its own book. So we're actually working on a new book for that, because it's an issue that doesn't come up a lot in conversation when I talk to people. But if you talk to them long enough, you get into this topic, they start to open up to you about things that have been holding them back, or ways that they have been self-sabotaging themselves. And it's actually very, very, in fact, I'd probably say everybody has one thing that they're, holding on inside. And I think the hardest thing to do is, like, first of all, to recognize that it's there is not always easy. We cover it up. We just have ways of avoiding looking at the truth. That's always a hard thing to do. So I'm not saying it's easy, but when you actually do, you start to open yourself up to so many other possibilities and opportunities as well. So that's obviously like a bigger topic, but that was where that book was written, just based on my experience with struggling with self-sabotage, struggling with procrastination, which was another one of the books I put together, Do the Hard Things First, came from my struggle with chronic procrastination, which is still a struggle to this day. But I put the book together because I recognized it was very damaging to my business, to my lifestyle, and it was just one of those things where I never really took responsibility for, until I did one day, and I was like, wow, this actually has been, this procrastination thing's been controlling my life, like, for a very long time, and I just used to think that it was normal, or it was okay. I didn't realize I actually had a choice to stop doing it, and when I had that realization, again, I just felt very freeing. It was great to just get that out there. So
Yeah, absolutely. And that's exactly where I wanted to transition to next. Self-defeating behaviors, like you mentioned, are sometimes hard to recognize, full stop, let alone overcome, right? You might say to someone that they are a perfectionist, and they might actually take that as a compliment, but they don't realize that it's the thing that's holding them back, right? Because they can never allow themselves to do something that's 90% of the way, and then that keeps them from actually putting anything out there into the world, etc. Right? So that's one of those things. And procrastination is another one, right? And this is maybe something that people even experience when they start to taste success as well, right? There's a big difference between people who have a little bit of success, and then there's a big difference between those who then sustain that success as well. And as you mentioned, it was starting to impact your business, it was starting to impact a lot of different areas of your life as well. So talk to us a little bit more about that doing the hard things first concept, because it does seem kind of counterproductive, because most people will push the hard things to the very, very last minute. There's this degree of productive procrastination that's around as well. It's like, okay, let me do all these different tasks that make me feel good and make me feel busy, but I'm not actually moving the needle forward on anything that I want to. So talk to me a little bit more about that kind of quote unquote counterproductive mindset of doing the hard things first.
Yeah, and I love what you said about the productive procrastination. That's the perfect term for it, because I'm a master of that. I've mastered the, trying multitasking, and, that didn't work out very well. So for the productive procrastination piece, though, so here, just to go back and give you a little bit of a story. When I left my corporate job back in 2019 and I decided to become the full-time author that I'd always dreamed of, I thought I was just going to sit home, write books, and do some coaching, and it was all going to be good. And it was for a while, and then COVID hit, and we all know what happened there. And suddenly found myself I went from working in an office with other people to suddenly being at home alone with my three dogs, and kids are off at school, and I'm just at home, stuck at home, just living the entrepreneurial lifestyle, and I had no plan, and my business was failing and all this, and the procrastination actually really started to kick in, because there were a lot of things that I'd never dealt with before, I have to do my own taxes, and have to fill out these forms. And these are things, by the way, that I'd never really done before. When you work for a company, they actually took care of everything. I just had to sign my name on a form at the end of the year. They filed the taxes, right? So we're kind of spoiled that way. And suddenly I had to do all these things that I realized I wasn't really good at, organization. This could be an ADHD related issue, which it probably was, but that's a different topic. And I just found myself buried in a mess of things that day by day, I didn't want to do. Writing was the least of it, but I got so stressed out by a lot of these things that I would just spend days not working at all, just kind of zoning out, watching TV, and just doing everything but working on stuff, because I just didn't want to do it anymore. It was weird. It just got to this point where procrastination, we'll call it procrastination, but it was really I just think I developed the fear of moving forward, because suddenly I was my own boss, which a lot of people talk about being their own boss or manager, but until you're actually in that situation, what I realized is it sounds kind of sexy, but I realized I'm actually not my best manager. In fact, I'm not a very good self-manager at all. I can manage other people okay, to a certain point, but when I actually had to do this, take care of Scott, things started falling apart pretty quickly. So I would say about moving out of COVID, though, moving out of that mess, I started to do meditation. Actually, I got into meditation, and what I mean by that is I actually started to spend time sitting down, thinking about the things that I really wanted in life. And this was hard to do. And I had a mentor coach at the time who was walking me through these things. I started discovering new mentors online, Ed Millett, and I've always known about Tony Robbins and Ed Millett, and Tom Bilyeu, who runs Impact Theory, and I started absorbing their content. And they every time I went from I think what was almost utter failure in 2020 to back on track in 2021, and then I wrote Do the Hard Things First, which actually ended up taking off unpredictably. It was just something that I created a book, to be honest with you, for myself. It was my blueprint to get myself out of a mess. And for me, that's how I've always communicated with myself, I think, is to write stuff out, whether it was journaling or writing a book. So I wrote the book, the content. I thought, well, I wrote another book, might as well publish it, which I did. And people just, I think, a lot of people really liked it because it was solving a big problem for them. So that was a good thing because that's what I like to do is solve problems for people. But I was actually trying to solve my own issues with this thing, and I did a lot of research into it. And I was like, when you look into, when you realize like you've got a self-defeating behavior, whether it's procrastination or something else, and you start to research about it, and you start to look into the psychology a little bit. You're like, that's why I acted that way. That's why I do these things. And then the lights start to come on a bit more, and you realize like, well, then you actually realize you're not alone because other people do the same thing. When I started talking to people about it, they're like, yeah, I do the same thing. I just don't really talk about it, But so that was really good to get a lot of insight from people, like people who are reading the book and, just giving some feedback on it. But yeah, I think what happened with that is that I had to look at the ways that procrastination was really, like, it really hurt my business. But the other part of that, though, and this is actually tied into the fourth book that's coming out in the series, coming out next month on shiny object syndrome. Those two are actually tied together because what happened is I got really desperate at one point where it's like I started just grabbing at anything that moved, because I was kind of sinking really fast at the end of 2020. And shiny objects were just all over the place. I mean, things I could buy that I thought I needed, and it just almost bankrupted me actually, right? So again, I wrote a book on that because of my personal experience. And then when I started talking to other people about it, they're like, "Oh yeah, I go through that all the time in my business." So I realized I was onto something. I guess in the end, like we all, like a lot of us struggle with the same things, but we don't just, we don't walk around with, these problems written on our t-shirts, so until you actually get into conversation with people about it. But that's part of my, I think the thing that really drives me is to find out, okay, I've got this thing. And by the way, and like I am a procrastinator is not getting away from the labels of these things is really important because that's the thing when we discover something about ourselves, like, I am, and then when you put the label on it, well, then you actually start to act that way. Like the behavior becomes you because you start to, I am, and then fill in the blank, and that's what you are. So I would catch myself every time I said, I am a procrastinator, and I realized, oh, wait, no, I'm not. That's just a behavior that I buy into. It's a behavior that I've been practicing for a very long time. What I really am is an action taker. And I would just change the label, right? And I would just tell myself, I would stand in front of the mirror. I still do this, by the way, because I have to stand in front of the mirror, and I would say, like, I'm an action taker, and today I'm going to do these things. And when I did, when I practiced this routine, I do those things that I say I'm going to do, because the best thing you can do for yourself on any given day is show up for yourself. If you say you're going to do something, show up and do it, because that's what the book's really about, by the way. Not just about how to overcome procrastination. What it's really about is building trust with yourself. Because I think what happens with a lot of us is like we just, when we don't show up for ourselves, we don't do the things that we say we're going to do, we lose trust with ourselves. And then, if you don't trust yourself, well, you're probably not going to trust anyone else, and no one else is going to trust you either, because they're going to say, well, oh yeah, well, there's the guy who doesn't do the things that he said he was going to do. And so you just start to manifest that. And I didn't want that, right? So anyway, the labeling was a like a big eye opener for me. So again, just for anybody who's listening, like catch yourself when you're labeling yourself something, because chances are you're not that thing. That's not what you are. It might be something you're practicing, but remember, you can change that. And that's the great thing about it, realizing is like you can change that at any time. You just have to change the habit around it and catch yourself whenever the trigger shows up, and you're practicing that thing. Go, oh wait, I'm not doing that anymore. I'm doing this now. So
Yeah, I like that. If I broke that down into a bit of a framework, it would be first identifying the existing label that you place on yourself, choosing a better one that's far more productive, presenting evidence to suggest that's true. And that evidence is ultimately going to build the trust because you're going to see yourself do it, right? So if I was to map that out into 4 steps, that's what it would look like. And I think it's a really powerful approach because of so many people, like you said, they get so caught up in these labels and they've been doing them for so long. And we are the story that we tell ourselves, and our life will show us examples of that. And it's interesting. Again, I work within the world of health and fitness. A lot of people are like, well, I'm not a healthy person, or I'm a foodie, or whatever that might be. And it's like, well, yeah, you've got plenty of examples of that, but they're from the past. What about your present? What about today? What about tomorrow? Can we give ourselves evidence that suggests that you're something a little bit more in line with where you want to be? Can you be that healthy person? Can you be the person who enjoys food but doesn't need to do it to excess? Well, all you need to do is tell yourself that that is the case, show yourself a few examples of that, compound it on each other, and then all of a sudden, that starts to become your new identity. So obviously that's a really powerful framework, and it helps obviously people tap into that. How do we stop ourselves from falling back into the traps? Is it that identity, once it starts to build and once obviously we start to see that evidence, do you find it sticks? Or you mentioned that you're still working on procrastination to this day. How do you not get sucked back in to the procrastination lifestyle that you had prior? How do you have the strength to kind of keep going forward in this new identity that really serves you and that you actually want to have within your life?
Yeah, exactly. You said it right there, the identity. So actually, if you look at the course of our conversation, like actually, like a lot of these things is about building a new identity for yourself. Now, give an example, just going back a ways, like if you're working in a job and you say like, I am a teacher, for example, but maybe you hate teaching. Maybe that's not the job for you. But every day you show up because that's what you're doing. And so you label yourself as the teacher. And we get it, like that is your job, right? But what if you wanted something different? So like I said, I mean, I've changed my identity several times, but it wasn't like I just decided it right there and then it just happened. I had to, like to your point, I had to keep working towards it. So it kind of like, it would go like this and then it would go down and it would go up, and it was kind of like, it wasn't like a linear process, right? It went like this, and eventually the identity got to the point where, it stuck. Like, I mean, I can't explain it except that it got to a point where it's like, that is like, for example, the writing the books, for example. When I put out enough books, and I actually, for the longest time, I struggled with the imposter syndrome, because it's like, well, I've written a few books, but I'm not really a writer. And I wouldn't even label myself as a writer. I was like, it's my hobby. And I still just refer to, writing books as my hobby. But when I actually started telling people like I'm a writer who makes a lot of money at their writing, for example, right? Even if I wasn't at the time, I had to convince myself that that is the identity that I wanted. And then eventually it did happen. Now, at what point it happened, I can't quite say. But at one point I just knew like, this is the identity that I now own. And this other identity that I used to own, like I'm done with that. And don't get me wrong, there are times when I would slide back into that other identity as well. Like that's just going to happen. But the thing is like once you get over the hump and you've got, you're like 70-80% into this new identity, gradually like the rest of that will just fall away. And that was like with everything that I did, every transition that I went through, like that was always the case. There was always that kind of like climbing up the mountain, and you kind of dip down a bit into a valley, you go up another peak, you go down a bit more, and then eventually like you keep walking and you're going to leave that old you behind. And not to say there's anything wrong with the old you, like you need that too, but you don't have to hold on to the past and say, you don't have to live back there, and you don't have to live back there with, the regrets that you have and the failures you've had and all the mistakes. I mean, that stuff's back there and that's good stuff. Like, remember what that is. That's part of the journey. But the new you is going to be building new experiences, and you're going to be building new opportunities. And so for me, like now I'm actually building a new identity now where, I'm still, the writer guy and putting books out and building frameworks and helping people with that. But the new me is going to be, wants to be on stage in front of thousands of people, in a stadium. And kind of like, that's like the new vision that I have for myself. Now I'm not there yet, but that's the always working towards like that new transition, because for me, it's exciting to do that, first of all. And someone said to me recently, like, they're like, aren't you ever satisfied with what you got? And I'm like, oh, I love what I've got. I'm in love with it. Like, great life. And I could, if it ended today, I'd be, like, if that's the way it's going to be, that's the way it's going to be. But it's not yet. Something is still telling us like there's got to be something more that we can, like another mountain we can climb, because if we get to another peak, there could be a lot of other people on the other side that like maybe need my help. I hope so anyway. So that's just kind of what keeps driving me forward to, get to that next level. It's not like pursuing a financial goal or trying to outdo myself from the last success. It's just that the higher up I go, the more people I think that I can just, I want to bring everybody with me, and I want to show people like this is how we can do it. So.
Yeah, and I think that keeps the journey of life exciting as well, right? We thrive off progress, and I think some people get a little bit lost in that, and they're like, well, don't you want to slow down? Or like you said, are you not settled? Are you not satisfied with what you have? Do you not want to just like take it easy and settle? And it's like, well, if that's not the path that's calling you, then why would you do it? And if you've already seen such great rewards from taking the path of progress, then I see no reason why you would stop. Of course, you've got to reflect on your values, your priorities, and you've said that really quite early in the conversation, is that you want to make sure that you have enough time to do the things that are important to you. And if that is something that remains important to you, then I think people should always continue to chase progress, whatever that might look like. That might look like traveling, that might be progress in terms of life experiences, or it might be progress in terms of how can I be a better family member, dad, brother, son, mother, whatever that might be. And it is a form of progress, but it's just about where you're applying it. So I really like that perspective as well. So Scott, this has been a truly fascinating conversation. I feel like we could probably speak for another 3 hours, but I will respect your time. And I do want to go for a couple of final questions for you. And the first one I have is, what impact do you want to have on the world with the work that you do?
Yeah, I want to show people that there's a way that they can have everything and anything that they want to. And to get to that level of belief, it comes down to clarity. Like, just take time out for yourself, figure out what it is that you want, pick up some books, read some, like take some courses, whatever it takes. Like I'm always in learning mode. Like I always want to know, like, what can I learn next that's going to be able to, like, again, take me to that next milestone, right? And the reason for that too is like driving forward like that. I mean, that's a good thing for me. The reason is because if I stop growing, my fear is that I'm going to start sliding back into those old behaviors and back into that old identity. And I've worked so hard to get out of it that I don't want to go back into it again, right? Don't get me wrong. I mean, the past is the past and love it, and it was what it was, but I want to move forward. And the only way for me to do that is to continue learning more about myself, more about the world around me, developing that awareness. Just to answer your question more clearly, I love it if people could just become more self-aware of not only like what they want, but how their contribution can impact the world as well. Because I used to think it was all about me and my success, and I realized, well, actually, when I started to think bigger, I realized like time goes on, and eventually, everybody that I impact today, they might actually take on one of those strategies or just one thing that they learn and pass it on to someone else. That one thing that they're passing on to someone else could actually change that person's life. Sometimes that's all it takes really, is to change something. It's just like you hear something for the first time, and you're like, wow, I've never heard it. Like I've never heard that before. And someone just adopts that idea and they turn it into something. So just imagine like, your life could impact thousands or tens of thousands of people, like down the funnel. You just don't know the impact of this thing like 5, 10, 50, 100, 1,000 years from now. You just have no idea. So I just want people to think big, if that makes sense. I just want them to think bigger, because I have to push myself to do that. I mean, I get locked into my problems and this and that. I realize like I'm focusing on the wrong thing. I'm focusing on the small things. Not to say that our problems are small, but actually for the most part, when I look at the things I'm worrying about, I'm like, I can't believe I was worrying about that, like paying that bill or whatever it is, and so I realize like life's much bigger than that. So when I think that way, I actually have a lot of gratitude, and gratitude is one of the greatest keys to happiness. That's what brings fulfillment. I wrote a book on that too, just based on my personal experience with gratitude. And the reason I wrote it is because I felt like I didn't have enough of it, and so I just wanted to express that through my writing. But yeah, anyway, that is kind of a long answer to your question, but that's just the thing that I want people to absorb the most. Like you can do whatever you want to. You just sit down, get really clear on what it is, and then just take the next step forward. You don't have to have the whole thing figured out. You don't have to know where the destination is going to end up. You just have to figure out what is the next step, and then start to build as you go.
I love that. I love that. And where is the best place for people to find you if they want to keep up with the work that you're doing or read some of your books?
Sure. Well, they can go over to scottallanbooks.com. We have a online store there where they can check out the books. We're just in the process of finishing it up actually, but it's been live, and you can go there and check things out. We've got big plans for that this year, and they can go to scottallanpublishing.com. We have 2 sites, and they can just find out more about the books, and we got the blog post on there as well. And if they want to know where to get all the books, of course, they can always go to Amazon. They tend to have a lot of stuff for sale on there. You can just probably plug in Scott Allan author or books, and I'm sure you can find everything on there.
Amazing. We'll make sure all of that is in the links below. But Scott, it's been a fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for your time today.
It's been great. Thank you.